The uses of every naval and aerial unit in Noobs in Combat explained. I'm making these two one video because longer videos tend to do better on YouTube and these units usually go together pretty well. The cargo ship is extremely cheap for the massive support role it plays in every naval unit enabled map. It has access to infinite resupplies, meaning it doesn't need to get resupplied itself. Just one can provide enough ammo to all your ships in the area, and if you're smart with it, two or so will usually be enough to heal all your ships in the area as well. It is also very useful for resupplying ground units on the shoreline. If you really want to take it further, you could resupply ground supply units so it effectively has infinite supplies as long as it stays close to the shore. The Motorboat is a good cheap ship for helping defeat much larger and expensive ones. It has decent mobility of 3 and its torpedo does good damage to large ships. Also, it can protect itself from aerial vehicles. I would never use this by itself, but as long as you have other units that can tank the damage for it, the Motorboat can actually stack up a lot of kills. The Missile Boat is a completely defenseless artillery boat by itself, but can one-shot battleships with a radio. Its gun launches missiles across the map that do enormous damage. The range for this thing is a little interesting. The basic field gun range just barely reaches each side of this square, but the missile boat's range straight up just actually leaves the display screen. In other words, you might consider its attack to be intercontinental ballistic missiles. Basically, it's good when you have radios, and it's way behind your front lines. The diesel sub is similar to the Motorboat in that it can do very high damage to large ships, but it can almost always guarantee one hit on them due to its ability to become hidden. One diesel sub likely won't get you any kills, so I recommend either bringing more or backing it up some other way. Also, don't stay near enemy ships for too long since most of them have sonar, which means they can eventually figure out where your sub is. The cruiser sub is a little harder to kill than the diesel sub and has a lot more ways to support your army. It has an anti-ground and naval artillery attack and can hold one seaplane that can help it use the artillery as long as it's not a torpedo bomber. Really, the cruiser sub is just a very versatile unit that can defend itself pretty well, and unlike the diesel sub, is much better at protecting territory. The destroyer has an artillery attack that's basically a slightly improved field gun and has a depth charge to obliterate submarines. For the price of 80 ticks, they aren't bad for pushing since they also tend to not get one shot by anything. They don't have super high damage, but they have good range, and when paired with a radio, very good range. The cruiser is very good for defending territory against all types of enemy units. The main thing it excels in protecting against for a naval unit is aerial units, though it doesn't have a ton of range when doing so. While I would only recommend using it with a radio, if you have one, it's much cheaper to use than the battleship. The battleship costs 240 ticks, which is almost half of your entire starting bank account. The reason you would want to use it is if you wanted to defend against or maybe attack large groups of enemy ships. When paired with the radio and not put at the freaking front line, it can absolutely decimate the enemy's navy. This is made especially easy to do since it can hold one seaplane. Just make sure to not let the enemy get any radio near it, or you'll be seeing a whole lot of your battleship getting one-tapped by a missile boat from across the ocean. The Seaplane Tender is pretty expensive but can carry 3 seaplanes, which is probably enough radios for the rest of the game if you use them smartly. It can also repair nearby ships, so if you don't have enough cargo ships, it can help out with that as well. It's very good to use if you've got a friend using a battleship or a missile boat since they benefit so much from having radios. The aircraft carrier can carry up to 3 of any aircraft and spawns with a dive bomber inside it. In order to get the other 2 aircraft, you're going to need to spend an insane amount of money, so I wouldn't recommend ever using it when playing by yourself. However, if that's not the case, you can provide a ton of help for your team via aerial support. Of course, just remember to be careful since most ships have a way of defending themselves against aerial units. Aerial units. The Spotter is a cheap aerial unit that has one of the best radios. It's most useful when flown above enemies that can attack it before calling an artillery strike down on them. It's also good for scouting out territory. Similar to the Spotter is the Seaplane. The Seaplane can land on water and can also be stored in multiple kinds of ships. It too is very good for scouting and calling an artillery, but should be protected by your navy, otherwise landing on water will just get it killed. The Torpedo Bomber has the same water landing feature of the Seaplane, but can be used more directly for offense. It is a large torpedo that can be launched at large enemy ships for a ton of damage. Just be sure you don't put it in their anti-air range, otherwise it will most definitely get completely annihilated. The armed heli can be used in a lot more situations than most aerial units since it can be deployed in any campaign or map. It has rockets that do decent damage to infantry and lightly armored vehicles that can hit multiple squares, and has a machine gun for singling out specific infantry. Overall, it's extremely effective against large numbers of weak units, but can't do much against anything with real armor. The fighter is a highly mobile air unit that is great against individual infantry or lightly armored units. However, since there's already so many easy ways of dealing with those guys, it is also quite effective against other aerial units. Since dive bombers are completely defenseless, pinning fighters against them are basically just free kills. The jet fighter is just a more expensive, slightly harder to kill fighter with insanely high mobility. This is great for moving around the map extremely fast and dealing with pretty much any other aerial unit that isn't a jet fighter itself. Also, with the further increased mobility, it is actually faster than dive bombers, so their one chance of survival running is no longer an option. And of course, it's still good against infantry and lightly armored units as usual. The dive bomber is great for dealing huge damage to ground units and buildings if the enemy has lots of really powerful units but not anti-air. It can easily and safely chip away at their health. Again, if they don't have anti-air, you can also just completely destroy their buildings, especially if you have multiple dive bombers. The main issue is the fact that it really can't defend itself at all, so if anything can attack it, they will have a very easy time doing so. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.